One day, she said, well, they were jealous. And I had never really even stopped to think of it that way.
John Fogerty was more than just the lead singer of Creedence Clearwater Revival. He was the driving force behind some of the most memorable songs of the 1960s and 70s. His voice was powerful, his guitar playing was distinctive, and his songs became the soundtrack for a generation. Without Fogerty, we wouldn't have classics like Bad Moon Rising, Fortunate Son, or Born on the Bayou. But success came at a heavy price. Fogerty didn't just lose his band, he lost his brother, fought for years to keep his own songs, and nearly lost his sanity in the process. Throughout his career, he made enemies and held grudges that lasted for decades. Here are the stories of 6 musicians and industry figures that John Fogerty came to deeply resent. Bruce Springsteen, the crown he never got. When people mentioned Bruce Springsteen's name around John Fogerty, the atmosphere would change. Fogerty's hands would tighten, his voice would become colder, and everyone in the room could feel the tension. It wasn't that Fogerty hated Springsteen as a person, but he hated what Bruce represented to him. Fogerty grew up in El Cerrito, California, in a working-class family. His father was an alcoholic who wasn't around much, and money was always tight. These experiences weren't just background details for Fogerty. They were the foundation of his music. Songs like Fortunate Son and Born on the Bayou came from real experiences of hardship and struggle. Then came Bruce Springsteen. In 1975, Bruce released Born to Run and became an overnight sensation. Major magazines like Rolling Stone, Time, and Newsweek called him the voice of working-class America and compared him to Bob Dylan. Meanwhile, Fogerty was trapped in a terrible legal battle with his record label Fantasy Records. He couldn't even perform his own songs without risking a lawsuit. While Springsteen was being celebrated as the champs, Pion of the working class, Fogerty felt like he was the one who had actually lived that life. He had grown up poor, been drafted into the military, and written songs from genuine experience. To see someone else get credit for representing that world felt like a betrayal. Fogerty never publicly attacked Springsteen, but people who worked with him noticed changes in his approach to music. He started making his recordings rawer and less polished, as if trying to prove his authenticity. Studio workers remembered him saying things like, "We don't dress this up, we live it," without mentioning Bruce by name, though everyone understood who he meant. The two men rarely interacted publicly. When Fogerty was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993, he chose to perform with Springsteen rather than his former CCR bandmates. Bruce gave a respectful tribute, calling Fogerty an Old Testament prophet, but it felt formal and distant. Years later, in 2014, when Springsteen performed Fortunate Son at a military concert and faced criticism for choosing an anti-war song, Fogerty surprisingly defended him. He explained that the song's meaning was often misunderstood and that he respected those who served in the military. In recent interviews, Fogerty has been more open about his feelings toward Springsteen. He admitted that, for a long time, he resented that Bruce got recognition as the voice of working-class America, when Fogerty felt he had actually lived that experience. "He got the crown for a life I actually lived," Fogerty said. "That's hard to swallow." The Eagles, polished versus authentic. Fogerty's dislike of the Eagles was about more than just musical differences. It was about what he saw as the commercialization of American music. When he heard the Eagles' smooth harmonies and polished production, he felt like they were taking authentic American experiences and packaging them for mass consumption. The Eagles were mostly session musicians who came together in Los Angeles, while Fogerty's music came from his genuine experiences growing up in a working-class California town. To him, their success represented everything wrong with the music industry: style over substance, marketing over authenticity. During the 1970s, while Fogerty was fighting legal battles that prevented him from performing his own songs, the Eagles were dominating the charts with hits like Hotel California. A sound engineer once recalled mentioning the Eagles' success to Fogerty, who responded by saying, "Real music doesn't wear makeup." Fogerty refused to work with the Eagles in any capacity. He wouldn't tour with them, appear on the same bills, or collaborate in the studio. When the Eagles were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame alongside CCR in 1993, Fogerty largely ignored them. His post-Eagles era music became intentionally rougher and more stripped down. He wanted his recordings to sound like they crawled out of a swamp, as one musician recalled him saying. Everything was designed to contrast with what he saw as the Eagles' overproduced sound. Even after reclaiming the rights to his CCR catalog in 2023, Fogerty's opinion of the Eagles remained unchanged. When asked if he had been too hard on them over the years, he simply said, "We were on different roads. My road had potholes." Neil Young, the art versus craft debate. The relationship between John Fogerty and Neil Young was based on a fundamental disagreement about what music should be. Fogerty believed in craftsmanship, structure, and clear songwriting. Neil Young embraced experimentation, feedback, and sometimes deliberately rough performances. Their first major clash happened at a charity concert in the early 1970s. Neil Young performed before Fogerty, and his set was filled with feedback and experimental sounds that some audience members loved while others found difficult to listen to. Fogerty watched from backstage and was reportedly unimpressed, later telling the sound engineer, "Now you'll see how you really write a song." Neil Young never named Fogerty directly, but he made comments about musicians who wear flannel shirts and sing about the working man, just to look authentic. Fogerty responded by calling out artists who dressed like factory workers while coming from privileged backgrounds. This led to an unspoken competition between them. Fogerty made his music even grittier and more traditional, while Neil Young continued to experiment with different sounds and styles. When Neil released albums that completely changed his sound, like the electronic trance or the rockabilly Everybody's Rockin', Fogerty saw it as proof that Young didn't take music seriously enough. The two men avoided each other for decades. They never performed together, never appeared on the same talk shows, and never acknowledged each other publicly. Their rivalry became one of the music world's longest-running Cold Wars. The legal battle that changed everything. Perhaps no relationship damaged John Fogerty more than his battle with Saul Zaentz, the owner of Fantasy Records. When CCR signed with Fantasy in the late 1960s, Fogerty was young and trusting. He didn't fully understand what he was signing away. The contract gave Fantasy ownership of all the songs Fogerty wrote while with the label. This meant that even though he wrote classics like Proud Mary and Bad Moon Rising, he didn't own them and couldn't perform them without paying the record company. The situation became even more bizarre in the 1980s when Fogerty released solo music. Zaentz sued him, claiming that Fogerty's new song The Old Man Down the Road sounded too much like his old CCR material. Essentially, Fogerty was being sued for sounding like himself. Fogerty had to go to court with his guitar to prove that the songs were different. He won the case, but the experience left him bitter and angry. He wrote a song called Zons Kant Dans, later changed to Vons Kant Dans, about a thieving pig, which everyone understood was about Zaentz. This legal battle lasted for decades and prevented Fogerty from performing his most famous songs for much of his career. It wasn't until 2023 that he finally regained full control of his CCR catalog. By then, Zaentz had died, but Fogerty's anger remained. Family betrayal, perhaps the most painful relationship breakdown for Fogerty, was with his own CCR bandmates, including his brother Tom. The band had been built around John's songwriting and leadership, but by the early 1970s, the other members wanted more creative control. When Tom Fogerty and the other band members demanded to write and sing more songs on the album Mardi Gras, John agreed but was unhappy with the results. The album was critically panned, with Rolling Stone calling it evidence of Fogerty's revenge, suggesting that John had deliberately sabotaged his bandmate's contributions. Tom left the band after this, and the remaining members continued to fight over creative control. John felt that his bandmates were jealous of his success and recognition as the face of CCR. The other members felt that John was too controlling and wouldn't let them contribute meaningfully to the band. When CCR was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993, Fogerty refused to perform with his former bandmates. Instead, he chose to play with Bruce Springsteen and Robbie Robertson. This public snub made headlines and showed how deep the wounds still were. The legal battles continued for years after CCR broke up. When Doug Clifford and Stu Cook formed a new band called Creedence Clearwater Revisited, John sued them over the use of a similar name. The courts allowed them to continue, but it created even more bad blood between former friends. The cost of holding grudges. John Fogerty's story shows both the power and the price of holding on to anger. His feuds with other musicians and industry figures shaped his music and his career in profound ways. Some of his best solo work came from his desire to prove his authenticity against musicians he felt were fake or commercial. At the same time, these grudges cost him relationships, opportunities, and probably some peace of mind. He spent decades unable to perform his most famous songs, fought expensive legal battles, and became estranged from family members and former friends. In recent years, Fogerty has shown some signs of letting go of old resentments. He's defended Bruce Springsteen when criticized, spoken more openly about his feelings toward former rivals, and focused on enjoying his reclaimed musical catalog. But the scars from these battles remain visible in interviews and performances. Fogerty's story raises questions about artistic integrity, the music business, and how long someone should hold on to anger over professional and personal betrayals. His music continues to resonate with new generations of fans, but the cost of creating it was higher than most people realize. Today, John Fogerty continues to perform and record music. He's in his late 70s now, with silver hair and the lined face of someone who has lived through many battles. When he performs songs like Born on the Bayou or Fortunate Son, audiences can hear both the triumph and the pain in his voice. He's still here, as he said at a recent concert, and that might be the ultimate victory after all the feuds and fights that marked his career.